clean manifest can clear a gate, but it cannot lift 1,000 pounds off a front axle. Garrick Vance knew that before the Mercedes Sprinter finished its brake dive at the auxiliary barrier, the ambulance came in too hot across the Oman tarmac. White paint shimmering under 112-degree heat, red crescent decals washed flat by the sun. The driver hit the brakes hard enough to throw both fake wounded men forward, behind the tinted side glass. The front end dropped and stayed down. The steel leaf springs gave one dry, heavy groan, not the quick complaint of an empty medical rig, but the tired sound of metal accepting weight it had not been built to carry. The sound carried through the barrier post and into the soles of Garrick's boots. He watched the tires first. He always watched tires before faces. The tire bulge gave him more than the driver did. Both front sidewalls bellied against the smoking asphalt, rubber pressed wide and ugly. The tread shoulders flattening, as if someone had packed the floor with dead iron. Heat crawled up through his boots. Kale stood at his left knee, mouth open, tongue low, panting hard enough to shake the leash ring. The hood shimmered above the grill. The ambulance smelled of hot coolant, sun-baked vinyl, and the bitter oil haze that rose from tarmac when a base baked all afternoon and still refused to cool. Garrick had spent half his adult life around vehicles that lied on paper and told the truth through strain. This one was speaking through its suspension. The gate terminal chirped once. Green. Clean. The screen showed Bahrain routing, medical priority, checksum matched, no secondary inspection required. A cleared medical rig would bypass the cargo queue, cross the north yard, and it would reach the radar service road before anyone with a scale could catch up. The machine had all the confidence in the world, which was useful in the a locked door is useful when the hinges are gone. Garrick had learned to mistrust that kind of confidence. It made good men stop looking. Garrick thumbed the edge of the canvas brace wrapped around his right wrist and felt the old tremor climb from the scar under his shoulder. It was small now. A tremor did not matter until speed mattered. He kept his hand away from the pistol and let the driver see the empty space near his hip. The men in the ambulance would not be turned into martyrs by nervous movement. The driver leaned out, face wet with heat and anger, nylon manifest sleeve slapped against the door. He shouted about blood loss, heat stroke, clearance, command priority. Behind him, one of the wounded men moaned on cue, thin and practiced. Garrick did not answer the performance. He looked past the driver to the nose of the vehicle, where the grill sat too low over the shadow. The brace rasped against his skin when he flexed his fingers. Sweat had salted the fabric stiff. He hated that the driver noticed the twitch in his thumb. Men under pressure looked for weakness first, then authority. Garrick gave him neither. "Vance," Talia Rostova said through the radio, her voice clipped under static. "Manifest is green from Bahrain. I have checksum confirmation. Medical lane wants release in 60 seconds. Garrick looked toward the raised arm of the barrier, then to the convoy officer, sweating near the booth with one hand already lifted. He was ready to wave the ambulance through and make this somebody else's problem. Past the booth, cargo trucks idled in a line, drivers leaning from windows, heat making every face meaner. Beyond them, the radar yard sat behind a second fence and too much trust. They saw a security chief holding a medical vehicle. They did not see axle load. They did not see the front springs sitting almost flat. Kale shifted, Booties clicking on the concrete lip of the lane, still panting too hard to lower his nose. The dog's chest moved like a bellows. His scent work was gone for the moment, burned out by the simple need to stay alive. Garrick felt that more than he liked. The desert was taking tools away before the fight had even named itself. In the command shack window, a young clerk glanced between the green screen and Garrick, already choosing which truth would be safer to repeat later. Official truth had a timestamp. Garrick's truth had rubber bulging against hot ground. He stepped closer to the sprinter and raised one hand, palm down, a plain order to hold. The driver kept yelling. Garrick let him spend air. He crouched beside the front tire long enough to see the hot dust caked in a crescent where the rubber had bulged under load. Then he stood before his knee could stiffen. The numbers arranged themselves without mercy. 2 patients, 1 driver, medical kit, water, fuel, litter frames. Not enough. Not even close. Blood and bone did not weigh a ton. The terminal stayed green. The barrier light stayed green. The whole clean world wanted the vehicle gone. Garrick keyed the radio once. "Talia, hold the lane." A pause came back, full of things she was smart enough not to say. The driver slapped the manifest sleeve harder against the door. Garrick looked at him, finally. "Kill the engine," he said. "Hands where I can see them. We're weighing it here." The words cut through the driver's noise. He kept his left hand low near Kale's lead, and his right hand still against the brace. He was waiting to see which part of the ambulance answered first, the engine or the men inside. Kale could not work scent with his mouth open. Garrick knew it before the dog even tried. The Malinois stood beside the sunken Mercedes with his ribs pumping, tongue slick and low. Breath coming in hard, wet bursts that had nothing to do with tracking. Panting moved heat. Sniffing caught odor. Under a 45 degrees Celsius sky, the dog could not do both. The driver had finally killed the engine. But the ambulance still ticked and popped as heat bled through the white hood. The medical air inside kept pushing faintly through the vents, carrying disinfectant, plastic, old sweat, and something too buried for a human nose. Garrick crouched beside Kale and felt the leash tremble against his palm. No scent cone. No lock. Just a working dog trying not to cook in his own skull. Behind Garrick, the convoy officer muttered into a handset. At the booth, the terminal still glowed its calm green lie. The driver watched through the open window, breathing through his teeth. The air above the tarmac wrinkled everything it touched. The red stripe on the sprinter wavered. The rubber around the door seals gave off a baked, sour smell. Kale's nose had dust crusted along one edge, and the black leather around his mouth looked dry enough to split. Garrick had seen dogs fail from heat before. They did not fail dramatically. They simply lost the trained part first, then kept breathing until even that got expensive. "Talia," Garrick said, low enough that the driver had to strain to hear. "I need the cabin air kept moving." Static snapped once. "Copy. You also need a better coffee vendor and a less suicidal hobby." Her voice was flat, but he heard the pressure under it. "Medical lane is screaming." Garrick did not look up. "Let it scream." He took the last cold pack from the pouch inside his vest. It had gone soft around the edges, more slush than ice, but cold was cold in that heat. Kale's eyes flicked to his hand. Garrick touched the dog's muzzle with 2 fingers, steady and familiar. Then he eased the cold against the tongue just long enough to make the mouth close. Kale shuddered. His chest hitched. The leash went tight. Garrick felt every bit of it in the bones of his hand. 5 seconds, maybe less, before heat took over again. The dog trusted the touch more than the cold. That was the only reason it worked at all. Garrick kept his own breathing slow, though sweat ran from his temple into the corner of his eye and burned there. The right shoulder wanted to jump. He pinned it down with habit and spite. He moved the dog's head toward the narrow wash of air coming from the cabin vent. Not forcing, not yanking, just guiding the line of the muzzle into the flow. The smell of hospital cleaner thickened. It was too sweet, too sharp, the kind of smell meant to bully every other odor out of a room. Garrick disliked clean smells on principle. They were often dirt with funding. Kale's nostrils worked once, failed, then worked again. The panting tried to break through. Garrick kept his hand light under the jaw, feeling the tremor in his own right shoulder start to flare as he held still. The driver stopped yelling. His eyes went from Garrick to the vent and stayed there a beat too long. One of the men in back fitted against the litter frame, a soft vinyl creak behind smoked glass. Garrick heard the tiny change and knew Talia would not. No drone feed could read a man deciding whether to move. The smell under the disinfectant was not strong. That was what made it wrong. It hid low in the moving air, dull and chemical, wrapped in the fake clean of gauze packs and wiped metal. Garrick could not name it by scent. He did not need to. Kale only needed enough of a thread to remember the job. Kale inhaled once, short and ugly. Then again, deeper. His ears snapped forward toward the vent. The growl started low in his chest, not at the driver, not at the wounded men. Not at a flag or a face, or any story a fool might tell about evil. At the vent. At the air. Garrick let the cold pack fall into the dust and rose with the leash still short. The dog barked once, hard enough to slap the side of the ambulance with sound. C4 had finally reached him through the vent. Talia went quiet on the radio. The green terminal hummed behind him, suddenly less important than the animal staring into the cabin airflow, as if the air itself had teeth. The driver's hand slid off the manifest sleeve. Inside the ambulance, the fake wounded men stopped pretending to hurt. Garrick saw one shadow lift from the litter. Saw the other turn toward the rear door. The cover had cracked. The next sound would not be paperwork. Garrick's left hand dropped toward the pistol, but did not draw. Proof was not safety. Proof was the thin bad second before men stopped pretending. The heat pressed against his back. Kale's hackles rose under his vest, and the leash came alive in Garrick's hand. The rear door of the Sprinter slammed open so hard the hinges gave a flat metal crack. And the first man came out low, no limp left in him, no patient slackness, no wasted motion. The second moved from the side door at the same time. White medical cloth tore away from dark armor. Garrick saw the shift before he saw the weapons, and that half-second was all he owned. He dropped hard onto his left knee and hauled Kale backward by the short lead. A brutal pull away from the open vent and the sudden black gap of the ambulance. The dog hit the ground beside him with a grunt. The first suppressed rounds struck the concrete barrier behind them with small, ugly snaps. They were not loud. They were worse than loud, private, and efficient. Chips lifted from the wall and stung Garrick's cheek like hot gravel. Dust blew into his mouth. The green terminal kept glowing at the booth. The alarm pole above it held its dead red lens in the heat. Nothing rotated. Nothing woke. Heat pressed off the ambulance body, as if the vehicle were breathing through its paint. Garrick drove his shoulder into the shadow of the barrier and felt the old scar bite back. His right hand jumped once inside the brace. He let it jump. Pain was information, not permission to get stupid. Kale's leash scraped over concrete, alive and tight, the dog's booties skidding for purchase in the grit. The Malinois wanted forward because the air still carried the vent, the target, the work. Garrick folded him back under the lip of the barrier with his forearm across the vest and felt the dog's ribs hammering. More rounds pecked into concrete, short bursts walking across the face of the barrier, without drama, without shouting. One of the fake wounded men slid down behind the front quarter panel of the Sprinter. The driver dropped from sight. A paper sleeve hit the ground and skated under the ambulance, the clean Bahrain, manifest now just a glossy scrap, collecting dust. Talia's voice tried to break through the radio, clipped and sharp under static. "Vance, talk to me." He did not answer yet. Talking gave the men something to hear. Moving wrong gave them something to kill. He tasted blood where concrete grit had cut the inside of his lip. The sprinter lurched. For a second, Garrick thought the driver was trying to ram the booth, but the nose swung harder toward the side gate chain. The ambulance hit with a dead, heavy shove that made the whole gate frame bow and scream. A chain snapped loose across the lane, whipping low and fast enough to cut dust from the ground. The secondary arm dropped. Steel came down with a blunt crash that rolled through the concrete under Garrick's knees. The yard changed shape around him. Open lane became trap. The broken gate sat behind Garrick. The sprinter blocked the lane to his right. And the container rows beyond the auxiliary gate turned into corridors, stacked steel throwing hard shade in long strips. A red FOD stencil on the tarmac disappeared under drifting dust. The base should have changed rhythm then. Guards should have turned. Lights should have started hunting the lane. The alarm housing only stared down through grit, dark and useless. While the booth clerk froze behind glass, with the green screen still washing his face. The only answers were the small hiss of suppressed fire, Kale's breath, and the groan of the damaged gate settling into place. Garrick looked at the dead alarm housing and understood. It had been made dead before the ambulance arrived. The enemy had not improvised a breach. They had built a quiet room around it. Garrick pulled Kale deeper behind the barrier and shifted along the concrete toward the first container shadow, keeping low enough that the hot wall skimmed the top of his shoulders. A round struck the barrier corner and threw pale dust across his wrist brace. The brace rasped wet against his skin. Kale's hackles stayed high under his vest, but the dog made no bark now. Sound had become expensive. Across the lane, the operators moved like men used to silence. Two shapes splitting away from the sprinter, one covering the yard mouth, one slipping along the container edge. The covering man paused twice, listening for Garrick instead of firing at shadows. Their professionalism showed in what they did not waste. The sun sat low behind them, orange and flat, and the heat began to bleed out of the steel in slow waves. The shimmer changed. Shadows thickened. Garrick felt the air tilt toward dusk, toward the hour when hot ground started lying to every camera pointed at it. The barrier behind him clicked once as settling metal found its locked position. He slid one hand along Kale's lead, pulled the dog into the first strip of container shade, and left the dead gate behind them. Static climbed inside Garrick's earpiece before Talia spoke. It came thin at first, a dry scrape under the small sounds of the yard. Then it widened until it seemed to fill the space between the containers. He had Cackle pressed in the first strip of shade beyond the dead gate, one knee in dust, one palm on the dog's vest. The Malinois was still breathing too hard. Not panic. Heat. The concrete chips from the barrier clung to Garrick's cheek with sweat, and his right wrist throbbed inside the brace, where the fabric had gone gritty. Behind them, the auxiliary gate sat crooked and locked. Ahead, container walls through long flat lanes into the north yard. The operators had vanished into those lanes with the kind of discipline that left no clean sound behind. Garrick could hear only small things now: cooling metal ticking on the sprinter, Kale's breath, his own throat working dry. The sun had dropped to a dull orange seam over the stacks. Heat came off the steel walls in slow sheets. The shade did not cool anything. It only changed the color of the burn. His shirt stuck to his back under the vest, then lifted in tiny patches when the dusk wind moved. "Vance," Talia said. Her voice had lost its clean edge. "Ground picture is degrading." A burst of static chewed the end of the sentence. Garrick stayed still, watching the nearest lane mouth. The shadows looked wrong. Not darker, flatter. The container walls, tarmac, and bodies all seemed to be giving back the same tired heat. Kale turned his head left, then stopped. No sense certainty in him, only beta tension through the lead. Garrick touched 2 fingers to the dog's side. "Wait." The radio hissed again. "Vance, ground temperature just hit 98.6. The thermal display is matching your skin. Everything is gray. I'm blind." She did not lecture. She did not need to. Garrick had heard enough. Thermal crossover. Delta T gone. The screen no longer had people on it, only heat pretending to be more heat. The expensive overhead eye had been reduced to a gray smear at the exact moment the yard turned into angles and steel. He looked toward the booth window, but even the glass had gone dull with reflected dusk. The world had not gone dark yet. It had gone equal. Equal meant no contrast, no friendly outline, no clean warning from above. Talia came back, tighter now. "I can still hear you. Keep transmitting if you move." Garrick's thumb hovered near the UHF radio body on his vest. Then he saw the shape beyond the second stack. A man's shoulder appeared and disappeared against the container ribbing. Not enough for a shot, enough for a fact. Another shape crossed behind him, carrying something that caught the last sun with a pale aluminum blink. A loop, not a weapon in the ordinary sense. A direction-finding antenna, light and deliberate, angled away from the man's body like a question aimed at the air. Garrick felt the meaning arrive as a small cold pressure under his ribs. The radio was not a lifeline anymore. It was a lantern. If he answered Talia, they would find the voice. Commander Aras had not needed an alarm. He had taken away noise, then waited for Garrick to create his own. Kale's leash tightened. The dog had seen the shift in Garrick's body before any command came. Garrick let the radio hiss one more time against his chest and said nothing. There was no room in silence for explanation. He did not make a show of it. He did not curse, did not warn Talia, did not give the men with the aluminum loop one last clean thread to follow. He pressed the radio power down until the green indicator died under his thumb. Talia's half-formed Vance cut into nothing. The yard opened around him in a new way, wider and smaller at once. The thermal eye was gone. The overhead voice was gone. The green radio light was gone too, a small dead bead under his thumb. Hot steel, flat dusk, Kale's breathing, and the faint click of Booties remained. The silence felt heavier once he chose it. Garrick slid the dead radio deeper under the edge of his vest and took the leash shorter. Not tight enough to choke movement. Tight enough to feel the animal's first warning before sound. His shoulder tremor settled into a hard, private pulse. The north container lane waited with no contrast and no mercy left for either of them. Somewhere ahead, men moved without speaking. Somewhere behind, the green manifest still existed in a system that had already failed the ground. Garrick leaned close enough for Kale to feel his breath. Then he moved into the gray with the dog at his knee, and the world cut down to heat, pressure, and touch. Kale's Booties made the first map. Soft clicks, then a scrape, then one short stop where the rubber found a seam in the ground strip. Garrick followed the sound, with his left hand low on the cloth-wrapped chain. The dead radio buried under his vest like a stone he had chosen to carry. The container lanes swallowed the last open air behind them. It was not quite a hallway, not quite outside, less than a meter across in places, with steel walls close enough to push heat into both shoulders at once. The gray dusk flattened the corridor until edges lost their usefulness. The containers had stored the day and were giving it back slowly, meanly, like bad debt. Kale tried to lower his nose and failed. His nostrils worked once, then twitched away from the wall. Hot rubber, baked paint, solvent, old dust, and sun-cooked plastic rolled off the steel in a sour wash. It buried everything. A container wall clicked and flexed as it cooled, and Kale stopped a half step too early. Garrick felt the dog's uncertainty through the lead before he saw it. No scent cone. No clean pull. Just heat and noise in the animal's nose, and the soft tick of booties on grit. He stopped in a pocket of shade that did nothing except hide them from nobody. His throat felt lined with sand. He took the last mouthful of water from the soft canteen and did not drink it. The choice annoyed him for half a second, then became simple. He cupped water into his palm and worked it under Kale's ears. Then he worked it low along the dog's belly and groin, where the heat held him hardest. Kale stood still for it, ribs moving too fast, eyes not pleading, not grateful, just present. Garrick liked that about dogs. They did not decorate survival. The water vanished almost at once, leaving only a darker track in the fur and a brief animal shiver under his hand. His right wrist throbbed against the brace where grit had packed under the seam. His shoulder tremor came and went in small, ugly pulses. Fine work was leaving him. Heavy work would remain until it did not. He flexed his left hand on the chain and shortened it another wrap around his fingers. The leash became less like a line and more like a nerve. Kale shifted his weight. Garrick felt the direction before the dog moved. Sight had failed, scent had failed, and the radio stayed dead by choice. Garrick stopped asking the yard to be a map and let the dog become a border. Kale's booties clicked twice, close together, then dragged a half-inch. Left wall near. Heat rising. Garrick leaned his shoulder away from the steel before it burned through the fabric. The dog's breathing changed at the mouth of a narrower slot. Not alarm, not scent, but body sense. A pause. A weight check. The short chain tightened across Garrick's knuckles, then eased. He moved with it, one boot at a time, pistols still low, not hunting with the muzzle, hunting with pressure. Sweat ran into his eye and stayed there, a hot salt sting he could not spare a hand to clear. Somewhere beyond the stacks, a piece of metal cooled with a soft ping. Farther back, the dead gate settled again and sent a dull tremor through the ground. None of it helped. The men ahead made almost nothing. That was their signature. Garrick felt sweat crawl down his spine and stop where his vest trapped it. The lane bent into a V-shaped corner, two container faces meeting at an angle that left a dark wedge of space beyond it. Kale slowed before Garrick asked. His ears turned sideways. His front paws planted, booties quiet now, and the chain gave one tight pulse into Garrick's hand. Not a scent alert. A body warning. Something in the angle was wrong. Garrick lowered with him, feeling his right shoulder pull and flare, and set his left palm briefly against the dog's ribs. Wait. The air tasted like hot plastic and metal dust. The dead radio dug under his vest when he breathed. Its weight felt stupid, heavy, useless, and final. Then came the sound. Nylon brushing armor, small and controlled, beyond the corner. Close. Not more than 3 meters, if the wall was telling the truth. Kale's chest tightened under Garrick's hand, but the dog held. Garrick eased one small metal spacer from the dust by his boot, closed his fingers around it. And he listened to the man beyond the steel breathe, without wanting to be heard. Garrick let the spacer roll first. Not far. Just enough to put a small metal click in the wrong part of the V. It touched the ground once, hopped, and tapped the container wall with the cheap little sound of dropped hardware. Kale did not move. The dog stayed compressed at Garrick's knee, breath low and fast, the short chain tight enough to speak through skin. Beyond the corner, the nylon sound stopped. A shape came into the wedge a second later, not rushing. Not fooled in any theatrical way, simply checking a disturbance with the patience of a trained man. Medical cloth hung torn over darker gear. A hard plate edge showed under it when the man turned. The corridor narrowed around him. Hot steel on both sides. No room for grace. Garrick saw a suppressed rifle angled close to the body, saw the man's head shift as he read the same geometry. Nobody spoke. The dead radio stayed dead against Garrick's ribs. Somewhere behind them, the yard gave a faint metal tick, and ahead of him the operator stepped one pace too deep into the corner. Garrick moved when the man's weight committed. His right shoulder fired pain before the rest of him arrived. The tremor flared white through the old scar and turned fine motion into trash. The first clean action he wanted was gone before it existed. His curved blade glanced against hidden armor with a dry scrapes instead of finding softness. The operator answered like a machine built by an unpleasant committee. No surprise, no curse, no dramatic breath. He hit Garrick into the container wall hard enough to knock the air loose, then seized the brace side and crushed it inward. Garrick felt something in the right wrist give, not fully separate, not clean enough to be useful, just a deep hot failure under the fabric. His fingers opened without permission. The pain was bright, personal, and stupid. Kale surged, but Garrick held the cue back for one more ugly second. The operator's weight came in, professional and heavy, driving the weapon line down the corridor and pinning Garrick against steel that had stored the whole day's heat. The wall burned through his shirt. His shoulder trembled harder. Fine skill was gone. Pride could follow it into the dirt. He stopped trying to be precise. Garrick dropped his center into the man instead of away from him, using all 85 kilos. The vest, the wall, the sweat-slick pressure of two bodies in a corridor too narrow for clean work. The rifle jammed between them and the hot steel, not free, not safe, not aimed at anything useful. Garrick's right hand was mostly pain now, a swollen weight at the end of his arm. He used his left to keep himself from sliding down the container face. And he drove with his legs, because legs still obeyed when hands got ideas above their station. The operator shifted, trying to make space. Space was the one thing the yard refused to give either of them. Garrick felt Kale through the chain, felt the dog's gathered body waiting on the edge of release. He put his mouth near the vest, breath scraping through his teeth. Bite. One word. Low. Kale came in under the mess, not heroic, not clever, just trained and fast. His body struck low and changed the other man's footing. The operator sagged half an inch. In that corridor, half an inch was a country. The rest was ugly enough to be real. Garrick did not win so much as keep losing in the correct direction. His bad wrist screamed when the operator dragged him with it. The blade came back in his left hand by feel more than sight. Heat, cloth, armor, breath, pressure. A gap opened for less than a blink, and Garrick took it without thinking about what a clean version of himself would have done. The man stiffened. 4 seconds later, the weight changed. Not dramatic. Just gone. The operator folded down the hot steel and struck the ground with a small, final sound of equipment and bone losing argument with physics. Kale released when Garrick pulled the chain once, then stayed over the body with his chest pumping, hackles high, no growl left to waste. Garrick stood badly. His right wrist had already begun to swell against the brace. His shoulder jumped in hard, private spasms, and for 3 breaths he could not make his fingers close around anything at all. He took the fallen rifle by the strap and dragged it clear without admiring it. The weapon was a tool that had arrived in the ugliest possible way. Ahead, beyond the V, the container lanes still held the other men and whatever they had brought to the radar. Garrick wiped blood from his lip with the back of his left hand. He shortened Kale's lead again, and moved because stopping had become the more dangerous thing. The radar transformer station appeared out of the gray as a low box of concrete, steel mesh, and damage waiting to happen. Garrick reached it badly, with Kale tight at his left knee and the captured rifle dragging against his thigh by the strap. His right wrist had swollen against the brace until the fabric looked too small for the hand inside it. Every pulse brought a bright, useless throb. His shoulder kept jumping under the vest, small spasms that turned the rifle's weight into a private insult. Ahead, two remaining operators worked in silence near the transformer housing. One stood half-covered by the corner of a utility cabinet. The other bent low at the base of the radar equipment, where a copper element caught the last of the dead orange light. 10 centimeters, maybe. Small enough to look stupid. Large enough to matter. Garrick saw the shape, the color, the way the men guarded it, without looking at it too long. He did not need a lecture from Talia to know the problem. If the radar died clean, the service road, the convoy lane, and the water beyond the perimeter would go blind in the wrong 5 minutes. He could not reach it by hand. He could not call it in. The radio was dead. The thermal eye was blind. Kale panted beside him, present and spent, no miracle left in the dog's nose. The clean solution was not available, which made it familiar. Garrick slid behind the shadow of a stacker arm and looked past the transformer, not at the device, but at the weight hanging above it. A reach stacker sat abandoned beside the service lane, its spreader still holding an empty container, high enough to cast a black shape over the concrete pad. Empty was a polite word. 10 tons of steel was still 10 tons of steel. And the yard had spent the whole night teaching that weight had better manners than people. The container was not floating by hydraulic luck. It was held where it mattered, locked through steel and geometry. A twistlock sat in the corner assembly, small against the size of the box. A hard little promise that weight would stay put until the promise broke. His right hand could not give him fine control. It could barely close. He took the captured rifle into his left side and felt immediately how wrong it was. Wrong shoulder, wrong hand, wrong night. The balance pulled against muscles that had never agreed to the job. The first operator shifted. The second straightened near the copper glint. Garrick felt Kale lean into the leash, body reading his tension without understanding the reason for it. The dog did not need reasons. Garrick did, and his was hanging above the threat. He set himself against the stacker tire, not steady, just steadier than open air. The rifle moved with his pulse. His shoulder tremor climbed across his back and tried to spoil the line before he found one. There was no clean marksmanship in it. His breath came dry and hot through his teeth. Dust stuck to the blood at his lip. The copper rod near the transformer winked once when the operator's arm passed beside it. The twistlock sat higher, darker, half hidden by shadow and the big stupid weight it served. It was the same lesson the ambulance had brought to the gate. Look past the clean object and read the weight. Garrick chose the smaller problem that could move the larger one. His left hand tightened until the tendons in his forearm ached. The damaged right hand hung useless, swelling, a witness with nothing to offer. The men at the transformer moved together, still silent, still professional, and that was almost worse than haste. Kale gave one low chest sound and pressed into the leash. That pressure steadied Garrick more than it should have. The shot cracked soft and flat in the trapped heat. Metal answered with a hard, ugly snap. For half a second, nothing happened. The half-second stretched, filled with dust, pulse, and the absurd possibility that the world had refused to move. Then the spreader jerked. The suspended container shifted straight down, as if the night had dropped its grip. Gravity did not hurry, and it did not miss. The 10-ton box fell through the gray air with a tearing groan that seemed too large for the narrow yard. One operator threw himself back. The other vanished behind the transformer housing as concrete dust jumped from the pad. The container struck with a brutal, flat impact that came up through Garrick's boots. And it drove into his damaged wrist hard enough to whiten the world at the edges. Steel crushed steel. The copper element disappeared under the drop, snapped into the dirt and dust with everything delicate around it. The transformer wall buckled. A radar support beyond it shivered, then sagged, not destroyed cleanly, not saved cleanly either. That was the bill. Garrick went down to one knee without choosing to. Kale crowded him, leash tight, breathing hard in the dust cloud. The fallen container still groaned under its own weight, settling a finger's width at a time. No siren came. No vehicle burst through the stacks. No voice returned to the dead radio to congratulate anyone on surviving basic physics. The remaining noise was settling metal, falling grit, and Garrick's own breath dragging through a throat that felt lined with glass. The immediate threat was stopped. The yard was damaged. His wrist was worse. Ahead, the dust made every shape uncertain, and aftermath began to move toward him without showing its face. The engines arrived after the dust had already started to settle. That was how Garrick knew they were not rescue. Rescue had a shape in time. This was recovery, audit, and noise. The first vehicles came in slow beyond the wrecked auxiliary gate, lights cutting weak bars through suspended grit. Somewhere overhead, a rotor thudded once and moved away, late enough to be scenery. The radar transformer yard looked smaller under the lights, and worse for it. The dropped container sat crooked across the concrete pad, one lower corner buried into broken housing. Its weight still pressing down as if the ground might argue. The copper element was gone under it. The radar support beyond the transformer leaned at an angle that would make engineers unhappy and commanders louder. Garrick sat with his back against a warm container wall. Because standing had become a negotiation, he kept losing. His right wrist had swollen into the brace, thick and bright with pain. His shoulder spasms had slowed to a deep twitch under the old scar. Kale lay close enough that one booty touched Garrick's thigh. The dog's ribs still worked too fast. Dust had grayed the fur around his muzzle. His ears flicked at every late engine, then flattened again. The fight was over, and the dog knew only that the air still tasted bad. Garrick found the canteen by feel, surprised there was anything left in it. Half a mouthful, maybe less. He looked at it for one dry second and almost laughed, but that would have taken water. He tipped it into his left palm and worked it over Kale's booties first, loosening dust from the rubber seams, then under the ears where heat still held the animal. Kale did not thank him. That was another mercy. He accepted the touch, blinked hard, and let one long breath out through his nose. Garrick used his thumb to clear grit from the edge of the vest buckle. The captured rifle lay 2 feet away, where he had dropped it after the container fell. A resource finished being useful. Men moved through the yard now. Too many boots, too much light, all of it late. None of them stepped into his space. Until a thin man in clean field, khakis crossed the dust with a carbon folder under one arm and a tablet in his hand. He did not look at the fallen operator first. He did not look at the buckled radar support. He looked at the terminal cart being rolled behind him, at the screen trying to wake itself under a film of grit. Garrick knew the type before the man spoke. The type always arrived after Waite had done the work. Garrick Vance, the man said. Investigator Theron Dane, Federal Systems Integrity. His voice did not accuse. It did not need to. The terminal flickered from green to pale amber, then to a dark lock screen with Garrick's name centered in a field of gray. Credential Suspended. Access frozen pending internal review. The words were clean, square, and completely uninjured. A small access bar beneath them changed from active to locked while Garrick watched. The machine did it without drama, as machines preferred. Garrick looked at the screen while Kale breathed against his leg. His left hand tightened around the canteen until the soft plastic creased, and the pain in his ruined wrist answered anyway. He had saved the radar from a worse death and still become an object in the file. Dane tapped the folder once with 2 fingers. Your hold order conflicted with a cleared Bahrain medical manifest. That manifest was not forged at the gate level. Garrick said nothing. His throat had no spare words, and the sentence already carried the uglier part inside it. Not forged at the gate meant the lie had entered higher up, where documents wore better clothes. Dane turned the tablet enough for Garrick to see a checksum trail broken in places it should not break. Green stamps marching across a compromised route from Bahrain through systems that had believed themselves clean. No speech came with it. No apology. No medal. Just a record, bright on glass, with Garrick's name locked under it. The terminal light darkened again, then held on the frozen credential notice. It looked less like punishment than weather, cold and procedural, something nobody in the yard had invented and everyone would obey. Dane closed the folder. You will remain available. That was all. He stepped away to speak to men with cleaner hands. Garrick watched the latelets crawl across the damaged radar frame and the crushed corner of the transformer housing. The immediate blast had not happened. The site still stood, if standing meant leaning and smoking quietly under bureaucratic attention. Somewhere inside a server path from Bahrain, a clean manifest had learned how to carry dead weight through a green screen. That part was still alive. Garrick felt the open end of it more than he liked. He tucked the empty canteen beside Kale's front paws and brushed dust from one booty until the rubber showed black again. Then he checked the other one with his thumb, slow because the wrist hurt even when he used the wrong hand. Kale's eyes half closed. No one thanked the dog either. Good. Praise would have sounded cheap in that heat. Garrick sat with his swollen wrist in his lap, his access frozen on the terminal behind him. And the larger breach was moving unseen through systems that still took a green light for truth.